Why then?
Hello, everybody, and welcome to our Anthem review. I'm John Luke, and I'm joined by our reviewer, Callie.
Hi, that's me.
This is something new we've been trying out. It's more of a discussion format. If you want to see the full review, you can go read it over at GameSpot.com. It's very good.
Nice. Oh, thank you.
So, Callie, you gave Anthem a 6 out of 10.
I sure did.
Which is a fair, and we'll get into that. But first, what is Anthem?
The game, right? Not
the game.
The Anthem. Anthem is interesting because it's kind of broken up into two disparate game parts. So you have the BioWare-esque story portion. So there is a heavy story focus, lots of cutscenes, stuff going on. And then you have the loot shooter, Destiny-like kind of structure to it. And so you're going, between story stuff on Fort Tarsis, which is your base of operations, into missions, and then back to Fort Tarsis, kind of like at a regular clip. Okay. So that's the basic structure. You are, like a freelancer, which is a loosely defined kind of like hero type.
Yeah.
Who wears a mech suit called a javelin. There's 4 different types of those. And that's the basic on paper gist, I think, the elevator pitch.
Okay, so let's start with the story, because this is a BioWare game, and that's usually the reason people really gravitate towards BioWare games. How does the story hold up?
It's difficult, right? It's hard. Everything about this game is you have 1 step forward, 2 steps back, or there's something good and it's broken up by something not so good. The story is like that too. So the main campaign, the launch story, is very difficult to follow. It's less like sci-fi and more space fantasy in that there's a lot of, made up terms and just a lot of instead of scientists, they're called arcanists. And,
right.
There's a lot of stuff like that in the game. It becomes very difficult to follow because you kind of need a translator to understand what's going on. And they do have that. There's a codex, but the world building is, not delivered very well. So it's oh, go here and silence this Shaper relic. And I'm I don't know what a Shaper is.
The Freelancers, along with the Sentinels, Guardians of the Walls, protected Freemark and its people from the chaos of our world. Until one day, the Dominion arrived on their doorstep. Cruel conquerors from the north.
The setup is very rocky. There's this heavy exposition dump, a lot of jargon. And, it's kind of like a typical there's a vague impending doom and evil thing going on.
Right. And
then there's the underdog hero ready to prove themselves, and that's you. But by the same token, you have kind of the semblance of what a BioWare character is in a lot of the characters in the game, both the main cast and the side characters. So it's difficult because I think the story does a great disservice to those characters. You have kind of your partner in freelancing, Owen, who is more complex. I don't know if you talk to him and he tells you about his childhood and how his parents had to basically sell him off and stuff. There's interesting world building in those conversations, but it's so buried. And so you don't really get a good sense of those characters, and your connection to those characters doesn't have room to grow or develop. So for example, there's 2 characters in the tutorial mission, which takes place 2 years before the events of the main games. There's this 2-year time skip. Those characters are, you're a rookie at that point in time, and there's not an established connection to those characters. There's this one moment where you seem like you might be friends, and then 2 years on, they hate you. And I'm I don't even know what I did. It's drama that's not earned. And there's emotional, that could have been an emotional payoff, but it just doesn't quite get there because you're I didn't have enough time to really get to know these characters. So it's this push and pull of I want to like this character. Owen, I think we were all talking while we were playing, Owen is you're oh, Owen.
Yeah.
And there's a mailbox. I don't know. This is something I had to tell you guys about, but there's a mailbox in the game and you can read messages from different characters and they just tell you about their lives and stuff, and it's really charming. But I got, it's just you were almost, if you had more time, if we just had more time together, I could have loved you kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that's the short of it, I think.
Right. And that's the main story. But then, in Fort Tarsus kind of acts like in Mass Effect, there's like the Normandy where you go around and you talk to people and you have these like evolving side conversations, and it seemed like those characters were like where the writing really shined.
Yeah, like I think that's what I mean by like this game kind of buries it. It buries the lead a lot because you have this like heavy exposition and these crazy words, and then you just talk to people in Fort Tarsus, and they're these little micro stories of just relatable human things. Like there's a woman whose daughter's been missing for years, and she's, you know, you can extend this kindness to her, and I don't even like that's something I don't want to spoil. Like I want people to talk to her because I thought it was really touching. And there's just these little moments, and you know, I kind of wanted to like grab onto those moments and hold on to them because I really did like a lot of those characters. They're all, to me, I liked the acting. I liked how expressive they were. There's, you know, Kristen Schaal, who's Louise in Bob's Burgers. She's a comedian, a bunch of stuff. Like she's a character, and her character is really cute and funny.
I'm listening. What do you have?
Only the finest selection of crafting materials in Fort Tarsus.
Really?
Guaranteed. You know why? Because our main competitor just closed up shop.
Why'd they do that?
I'm just learning the regulator game, but my Uncle Ronnie said, we made them an offer they couldn't refuse.
You know, there's good stuff there, but then you're like, how much time do you spend in Fort Tarsus between going to missions? And, you know, it's difficult. And that's where the game runs into some problems.
Right. So the stuff in Fort Tarsus ends up being at odds with the gameplay, specifically the co-op.
Right. So, yeah, so the general structure of the game is like you start on Fort Tarsus, you launch a mission, then you come back to Fort Tarsus. There's no way to like launch a second mission. There's free play, but like that's free play. It's like loosely structured. You're not getting much story out of that, right? But if you're playing with friends, you know, like we were playing together, we were playing in a group on Discord, and every like 5 or so minutes, someone would be like, oh, sorry guys, I'm in a cutscene, or sorry guys, I'm talking to somebody, and we'd have to like keep telling each other to be quiet, which is awkward, right? So it's weird because like for half the game, you want your friends there, and for half you don't. So the part that you don't really need people there is the story stuff, and like you miss out on a lot of those conversations if you're like playing with friends and, you know, everyone's just like, okay, let's get ready to launch the next mission, and then you feel bad because you're like, oh, sorry, wait for 5 minutes while I talk to a person. You end up skipping a lot of those conversations. Right. I think you, out of everybody we played with, you took the most time to talk to people, but that's because you were doing that, you know, on your own time, not when we were playing together.
And there were actually times where I muted you guys in Discord so that I could hear conversations.
Yeah, it feels bad. Like, you know, you want to hang out with your friends. But then when you get into the missions, when you get into like the actual like loot shooter kind of gameplay, then you do want your friends. And that's just at odds.
So yeah, because you can play it solo for the most part, but the game really does encourage you to play with friends.
Yeah, like when you set yourself to solo, there's like privacy settings when you go into missions. It'll tell you like, are you sure you want to do that solo? Because it's better to play with friends, and like loading screen tips tell you to play with people. And that works in gameplay, but it, like I said, doesn't work very well when you're trying to get that story stuff going.
Yeah, so let's talk about the gameplay then, because that seems to be the highlight of the game.
Yeah, like I think flying, I think, is something that everybody around here really, really enjoyed doing. Flying for me was the best part because you can just kind of like zip up into the air and take in everything from below and bob and weave and go under waterfalls and go underwater and do all this cool stuff. And that's where, you know, flying is so emblematic of my problem with Anthem, is that like your suit can overheat, and you can cool down by flying under a waterfall, for example, and then keep flying, and it's cool. But the map does not necessarily always have that available to you, and you will have to very often go onto the ground to cool down, and then you have to interrupt your flight all the time. That's just what happens throughout the whole game. It's like you have this really cool moment, and then you have to stop it to do some BS, let's say. But like combat, I think, is really fun at its heart. The weapons themselves are like not super exciting. It's not like, you know, a lot of people compare this game to Destiny. It's not like Destiny where like the shooting just feels so freaking good. The guns are like serviceable. Shotguns, for example, like I felt they like kind of didn't do anything. But the real thing that shines is the abilities that your javelins have. My favorite is Storm, which is like the mage class. I think a lot of us played Storm because you can like chain these elemental attacks and like freeze an enemy and then like smash them with a fireball and they kind of explode, and it's like it's really cool. And if you're doing that with your friends, like you as, you know, Storm, for example, can freeze somebody and then, you know, like somebody else can come in and hit them as another character, and that creates this like chaotic battlefield, and it gets really exciting. And I think the loot shooter part of this game that works really well is you're always getting new loot. You go back to Fort Tarsis, you change your loadout, and then you go into the next mission to experiment with your loot. And that's really fun because you can experiment with different combinations, different abilities. Like I would get an ability that I'd be like, I didn't even know this existed, but now I can throw frost shards at enemies, and that's cool. Like that core is very cool, but then, you know, you run into problems when, okay, we're all gonna have to wait for each other during our, you know, loading screens at Fort Tarsis, and then we, you know, I have to update my loadout, but John Luke's going to go talk to somebody, and somebody else is going to go do this, and then, you know, you're there for 10 minutes, and then you go into a mission for 10 minutes. So it's just chopped up. But I do think, like, there's a good, like, seed of gameplay and combat in there.
So Anthony on Twitter was wondering about, like, mission variety, like what you're actually doing within the missions. Do you feel like there's a good variety, like, of what you're doing?
That's a really good question. It's something I didn't talk about in my text review. Mm-hmm. The mission structure is largely the same. Like you fly somewhere, you shoot some stuff, you maybe like get an item that lets you unlock a thing, you know, like kind of sort of like a puzzle, but not really a puzzle, more of like a task. And then you go on and shoot more things, and then it kind of wraps up. That structure is the same. I think what keeps that variety going is the, you know, changing your abilities and trying new things. And you know, if you're playing as Interceptor and I'm playing as Storm, like, ooh, how can we combine our abilities to do cool things? Like, that's what keeps it from feeling repetitive to me. I played for a good amount of time, and I didn't feel like it was just a mindless, repetitive grind in the combat. It was more like the actual missions were just a background for the cool stuff you can do with your abilities.
Right. Do you feel like the game, there's a lot of depth to the combat. Do you feel like the game does a good job explaining that at times?
No. There's technical terms for some of the abilities you have that are just not ever explained, and they're not in any tutorial that I could find. So some abilities are primers and some are detonators, and combining those is how you get combos. I mean, you get a sense, having played many video games, how combos work. You're like, oh, you freeze somebody and then they shatter. That's a combo. Like, you get a sense of it. So it's not something that necessarily needs to be like super explained, but I didn't even know that there were terms for the different kinds of abilities. It was just, but you know, honestly, like I kind of had fun experimenting anyway, and taking that away was like,
sure,
oh, I just need to test stuff. So it wasn't a huge problem, but I was very surprised to learn that there were actual names for things.
So this game is a live service evolving game, and so inevitably everyone always brings up the end game when it comes to games like this. Do you feel like there's enough there at launch to be sustainable, something you want to come back to?
That's a difficult question because, like with this entire game, there's two parts to it. There's story in game, like continuing story, and then there's gameplay in game. And the gameplay in game is not super compelling. It's a complete, you know, X amount of contracts and X amount of this kind of mission and X amount of this kind of mission. And that's just like, oh, grind out the same missions a bunch of times to ostensibly get better loot, but then where do I use that better loot? Because like the combat's very exciting, it's bombastic, but then you get to a boss battle, like that would be kind of my idea of like a high tier, more end game sort of like goal is to like fight harder enemies, right?
Yeah.
But the bosses right now, like most of them have fire attacks that like overheat your suit, and then you can't fly, and like being able to float and like fly out of combat is combining your movement with those abilities is what makes it exciting. So the boss battles are just so underwhelming. So like I don't really have a place right now to use any cool loot that I get. Like there's no incentive for me to like get a masterwork version of a weapon because it's not that different from the weapons I already have, and where am I going to use it?
Right.
But on the other side, there is a cool like post-credit scene that was the most intriguing story beat in the game, which, you know, take that as you will. But like I saw that and I was like, oh, I want to know more about that. But of course, that's not in the game yet. So I just have to wait to see what any update could be.
So the other big thing that is a big talking point of this game is the bugs.
Yeah.
This game is in EA's early access period, and Mike on Twitter wanted to know if you felt like that hurt your overall experience, and that even if the game was to patch all the bugs, which they did just do a big day one patch, so they have fixed a decent amount of that stuff.
Yeah, it's about to go into, as of this recording, about to go into full launch.
Exactly. Yeah. Even if all that stuff was gone, like, would your opinion of the game still kind of remain the same?
Yes, and that's a really good question, because I kind of I mentioned the technical problems at the very end of my review, because my general philosophy with reviews is technical issues exist, game development is hard, and those things can be patched out, and in my experience generally it's a pretty smooth process to patch a lot of those issues out.
Right.
And with a live game you're going to have server issues and stuff like that. What's more important to me is how the game is designed, the mechanics, the story, things that are part of the overall game design. If that's flawed, then bugs aren't going to change my general opinion. I could handle somebody's arm clipping through a wall, which I saw, or my customized javelin colors being reset for some reason, which happened, or audio drops, which were frustrating. But that doesn't change how the game presents itself, and as a story, as a loot shooter, how those things don't work together, the conflicting ideas, technical issues don't change any of those things. And so that's what I really considered for my review.
Do you think this game has the potential to eventually improve that? Will it have its Taken King moment that Destiny 1 had, where it dramatically changed the game in a way that improved it for a lot of people? That's
hard to say, right? Because BioWare has said they want to continue supporting the game. There's more stuff planned, but we don't know. Yeah, that's the hardest thing is that post-credit scene was oh, I'm interested to see what they have planned for that. But how will that fit in with this world that was not, the world building is, is very confusing. Will that fit in with these characters that I have kind of weird relationships with, where the relationship I have with them in game, my player relationship to them is much shallower than my presumed character's inner relationship with them. There's a bunch of things that would need to be ironed out, and I'm intrigued to see there are good things in this game, and there's things I like about this game, and it could be cool to see how the continuing support can affect those things.
Yeah. So that kind of leads into our final Twitter question from Yeska, who is wondering about should online multiplayer games like this be reviewed with a different rubric? Because it's tough to games like these change all the time, and how do you handle that with a review?
Yeah, that's a super good question. Because a lot of games that are games as a service or live games like this do have rocky launches, which we did talk about. But overall, this is a game that is out.
Right.
You can spend money on it, which is not the most important thing, but the general public can play this game. And so as a critic, I have to evaluate what's in front of me. This is something I review Destiny as well for GameSpot. Destiny kind of has these ongoing tweaks, and then set expansions, and I can review those expansions and kind of continue to evolve my opinion. Some games might require looking at them, potentially updating the review or re-reviewing a game because it's changed so significantly. That's things that, as the reviews editor, that I do think about. So with Anthem, it's one of those things that I can see this game changing significantly over its life cycle. It very well could, and I can't cross that bridge until I come to it. So I do have to wait and see, and it's something I'm very open to, and I'm interested in seeing how this game changes. So I'm interested in reevaluating it down the road. But I don't think it requires a different rubric necessarily, just kind of an ongoing approach, or a different approach to what does a final review mean? Is the review always final? And for me, I think the conversation is ongoing, which is kind of the philosophy behind this review format too. Is something that I just want to continue to look at.
What do you say, freelancer? We'll make it worth your while. Owen, looks like the freelancer's right again. Well, us, anyway.
Excuse me, I just got a... That is excellent. I will go and run my diagnostics. Let me know when you're ready to leave. It was a pleasure.
All right, so that's your overall impressions of Anthem. You gave it a 6 out of 10, which is a fair.
That's the word for 6.
Yep. Sounds like there's a lot of good things and then a lot of things that kind of get in the way of that.
Yeah, just good things that don't really mesh well together, but good ideas.
All right, well, thanks for watching this, guys. As we said before, this is our new review format that we're trying out, so please let us know what you think of it in the comments below, and for more reviews, stay tuned to GameSpot.